whilst it's pretty dark and violent, it's good, colourful history that we should acknowledge, definitely. But where do you want to go with that? Because they said, we stole the land off them, which is quite true. I mean, you went in there and they occupied land and you went and took it. But what do you want to do with that? Are you going to give the title lease to your house in Brisbane over to someone? I don't think so. If you're not, keep your mouth shut. What's the point?
The so-called Path to Treaty legislation passed through the Queensland Parliament last week with the support of LNP and ALP, of course. The purpose of the legislation, and I quote, provides the framework to create the structures to prepare for negotiating a treaty or treaties between Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples and the Queensland government. Now that it's passed, the first order of business will be the creation of a First Nations Treaty Institute and the initiation of formal truth-telling and healing inquiry ahead of individual treaty and reparation negotiations. What's the KAPs take on the Path to Treaty legislation?
Well, mate, the KAPs, I think, characterised by being doers. Like, we don't like talking about stuff, rather we just want to fix problems. And if you see the world like that, and then you've got a hell of a lot of problems in our first Australian communities, and we've been buried deep in those for the last 50 years, I'd say, if I include my grandfather and my father, and now along with Nick and Shane and Dad, we're all working in this space very heavily, particularly Dad and I, with the concentration in our electorates. And it's very, very frustrating when you have people from 2,000 kilometres away who are suddenly saying they're interested in fixing those problems, and this is the main thing we have to get out there first. And I think that's one of the points I made in the speech was a Brisbane MP said to me, we were having a discussion about how we fix some of these issues in the Aboriginal areas, and I was doing all the listening, even though I probably was the most qualified in that conversation group to talk. But I was just doing the listening, and one said emphatically, the first thing we have to do to help people in Aboriginal communities is treaty. And even a couple other Brisbane Southern MPs around said, well, I'm not sure if that's right. And my response was pretty much more pronounced, where I'm thinking, crikey, haven't we got to fix renal units and RHD, rheumatic heart disease? It's killing a lot of our kids in those communities. Haven't we got to fix the grocery prices and the cost of living access in there? Have we just learnt with the floods and the renal units, so people have to go away? Title deeds so they can buy housing, and most of all blue cards so they can get access to jobs. They have all the stuff. But I fear things aren't always what they seem in politics. So a lot of this sounds good on the surface to some people and mostly in the cities, but I think this is just creating an excuse to the government to do nothing about the real issues. And we all share that view heavily in KAP, that this is an extension of that paternalistic type attitude that governments have in fixing these problems. And we proved with the blue card that was your case in point and your strong evidence that these governments aren't interested, whether they're Liberal or Labor, they're not interested in fixing real problems, because we put a solution on the table with blue cards that help people get access to jobs, and they both rejected it outright. And the other point I raised in the debate, because most of the speakers for this motion, but this legislation put by Parliament for $300 million we put towards it, most of the debate started by going through the colonisation history and saying they were really concentrating to know the history, and to which we all replied, yeah, well, that's good. All three KAPs, so that's great, but it's good to acknowledge the history, and some whilst it's pretty dark and violent, it's good, colourful history that we should acknowledge, definitely. But where do you want to go with that? Because they said, we stole the land off them, which is quite true. I mean, you went in there and they occupied land and you went and took it. But what do you want to do with that? Are you going to give the title lease to your house in Brisbane over to someone? I don't think so. If you're not, keep your mouth shut. What's the point? So we mean what we say in the KP. So if we're going to help people, we'll help them. We won't pretend and replace it with words or something ethereal or nebulous that sits up there in the ether. We want to help them with real things. We want to help them with blue cards. We want to help them with title deeds. We want to help them with grocery prices, rental units, RHD. That's the area we want to help people. And I think a lot, if not most, Aboriginal people in most communities would agree with us on that basis.
Were you surprised the LNP supported this bill?
Well, in a way, no. They followed, I think, that populous route in Brisbane and, the academics in the metropolitan areas. It's certainly not the populous view in the regional areas. And I think that's just a symptom of what our modern-day political parties are doing, is just trying to track and try and, get in front of what they think people are thinking, instead of making the call based on a value set and what they want their party, the values they want to project from their party, and making a call early and leading like that. So, look, who knows what their motivation was, and both sides voted for it. The vote wasn't recorded because we had less than 5 votes. So it was only 3 KAP and the member from Morani that voted against the treaty, and Labor tried to make a big song and dance about that and get activated everyone in the audience, which fell on, was a big flop. I mean, I think most people see that we're pretty fair income about this sort of stuff, and that they know they're not going to be, I think, thwarted by those clumsy attempts by Labor to try and make us look like something we're not. So there was only 4 of us. Doesn't get recorded, but that's how the Parliament voted, which I guess everyone knows is surprising, because the Liberals federally have said they're not supporting this sort of stuff.
Robbie, we've just returned from the first regional sitting of Parliament in, I think, 4 years. It was up in Cairns. How did you think that went? And was it a coincidence that you took the opportunity to raise the proposition of North Queensland becoming a separate state?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't a coincidence. It was a marketing exercise for the state Labor government to get up there and sort of try and win back support. And I'd say cynically, and I say that cynically, where obviously they defend that by saying we're just trying to get out there and listen. But I think that really speaks for itself, that if you've got to go and spend millions of dollars repositioning Parliament to demonstrate to people you're listening, you're probably not doing your job in the first place. I think, it's nice for people to feel like they're a bit engaged, but really having, you only had 100 or more people come through the door there, so it wasn't huge. I'm not going to say it was a waste of time. It's always good things make politicians move north, but at the end of the day, that Parliament we've got in Queensland is a collection of apologists. They run the line of the major parties that mostly represent Brisbane, and most of them have got to come and apologise to the electorate that they have to vote this way or that, but they're part of a party and they're forced to do that, so they can't represent your interests. We can't vote how I think you'd like us to vote because we're part of this party that's telling us to vote the other way. And that, we have, I would say, diametrically opposed positions on a number of key issues. And I sort of poetically had put those crime, crocs and coal, and we have very different positions on those, and that's forced our northern MPs from Liberal and Labor to take positions of their party that I think they wouldn't otherwise take, and or at least they'd take a lot stronger position if they weren't part of that party, but they become apologists. So when they have Parliament up here, I'm not so sure they would feel as comfortable as I do having Parliament up in Cairns, because the KAP MP, Shane Canute, Nick Demento, myself, and if Dad's around, we're just home, and you just mix in with people you normally do. But others, I guess, are talking to people that are pretty angry with them because they're part of parties that are representing Brisbane more than they are the North. So it was interesting to observe. None of it was really surprising. You had a lot of angry people protesting about crime, and not many people engaged in the process, because why would they feel connected to it? That stuff that was discussed, pathway to treaty, that's not resonating with, vast majority of North Queenslanders. They've got we've got massive problems with crime, and that's what they fill the whole parliamentary week with. That's the single bill. They intended for only one bill to be debated that week, but so few people participated in the debate that they had to cut they couldn't run it out to fill the week. They had to throw in another bill as well to debate. So, look, it was probably Parliament at its worst, and North Queensland got to see it. And, it's good that people had access to MPs, but I'm not sure that really is going to help too much when they're not doing anything in the first place. And like we always say, it's one thing to listen, and that's, the same cash cry with the voice to Parliaments. It's fine to have a voice and for people to listen, but unless they Unless someone's listening and acting on it, and the operative word being act, if people aren't acting on those, on that voice and that listening, well, what's the point? There's no point. And I think it's clear to say there's no reaction, and that's why we brought up North Queensland separate state. And we did it a bit more subtly than that. We said governance, self-governance, give us steps to self-governance. So put a North Queensland Parliamentary Council in so that we can have more autonomy in decision-making over where funds go up here, not you deciding let's do another sports stadium or let's do another water park or cultural centre. We'll more appropriately put that money where it's needed because we're more in touch with people. And they would argue that their MPs tell them that, but I think their MPs do a pretty poor job of that, and the outcomes are just the same. So we want the steps to stage would be self-governance, and that's what we called for last week. And we did it very pointedly in when the week that they have the regional sitting, and I think that resonated with a lot of people. And I think I even got a clap after my question in question time, which I've never had before.